It's a very wonderful video recapping areas of participation by Catholic Social Services within the community, within the extended community, Western South Dakota, etc. And we're extremely happy to have you as partners in this with us. On January 26th, 2015, Senator Mike Rounds was sworn into the United States Senate. Senator Rounds serves on 5 committees: Senate Armed Services, Banking, Housing and Urban Affairs, Indian Affairs, Veterans Affairs, and the Select Committee on Intelligence. Mike previously served as the 31st governor of South Dakota from 2003 to 2011, easily winning re-election in 2006. From 1991 to 2000, he was elected 5 times to the South Dakota State Senate. In 1995, his colleagues selected him to serve as Senate Majority Leader, a position he held for 6 years. During his time in state government, Mike was committed to growing the economy, keeping taxes low, and strengthening South Dakota families. A lifelong South Dakotan, Mike Rounds was born in Huron, the eldest of 11 children. He earned a bachelor's degree in political science from South Dakota State University. In private sector, Mike and his business partner, who happens to be here with him tonight, Carl Fisher, built a successful business and real estate business with offices throughout the state. He resides in Fort Pierre and is the proud parent of 4 grown children and 10 grandchildren. Please welcome Senator Mike Rounds.
Oh, sit down. Not necessary. Thank you. You know, I'm not sure that I've seen this many Catholics in one room since they forbid smoking at the bingo hall in Pierre way back when. My dad, as you can probably imagine, having 11 kids, mom and dad, I think they considered us to be a good Catholic family. My dad always joked that the one thing about it is Catholics had something in common. We all knew the definition of rhythm, and we all knew the definition of bingo. And if you ain't got rhythm, bingo. But Dad and Mom, they also had a lot of other things they were really proud of, and that was a family. When Mom passed away, Dad remarried Rosemary Scarborough, and we picked up 3 more, well, we had two brothers and 1 stepsister, and it became a bigger family. But family has always been important, and I would suspect that for most of us, we kind of just count on family, and we appreciate family, but we kind of forget sometimes the ins and outs of what it means to be a big family. I want to just share with you, Palm Sunday was one of those Sundays for us growing up where, a little different than perhaps today, but you put your best stuff on. Palm Sunday was the beginning of that very special time of the year. You could see Lent coming to a close, and all of those things that you'd been doing during Lent, you could see the end of it coming fairly quickly. And yet Palm Sunday also had that trepidation. I got to share with you, I never really liked Palm Sunday. It was, first of all, with all due respect to Bishop and to other members of the clergy, you were going to have a really long gospel. And then, depending upon the mood of the celebrant, you might have a sermon in which they were going to explain that really long gospel to you. But I think there was something else as well. You see, I remember Palm Sunday, my 4th grade year. It was the first year that I served Mass. And in fact, for Monsignor Paul McGuire, who at that point had been the pastor for close to 30 years in Pierre, he was pretty strict. and he expected his altar boys to know what they were doing. The first time that I served Mass was on Palm Sunday. It was 7 a.m. Mass. Mom and Dad thought it important enough to bring all the kids and to be there on time. Now, first time serving Mass, it meant that you'd practiced and you'd done your Latin, because at that point we were still doing the Mass in Latin. And a number of you are going, I remember that. And the second piece is you were always teamed up with an older altar boy who knew the ropes, knew how to do things. The problem is 7 a.m. on Palm Sunday, my partner didn't show up. And so I have Monsignor McGuire. I've been practicing my Latin, and I was going to serve at 7 o'clock in the morning with all my family there for the first time. It worked out. It started out in Nomine Patri Filius Spiritus Sanctus. Remember that? And you got to respond to it, and you work your way right on through the whole program. But I never forgot that what it meant was this was a pretty special day for us. Now, I was 10 years old. I had him as our Monsignor McGuire, all the way up through my high school years when he retired, and he moved us to Mary House in Pierre. I got a call my freshman year in college. I was back for the holidays just before Christmas, and the call was from the church, and they said, we're looking for someone. They'd called the Rounds family, talked to my mom, and said, we need someone who wouldn't mind serving Monsignor McGuire as he'd like to celebrate church. And he was looking if maybe you had an altar boy there. I was there, and Mom says, well, of course, we'll have someone come down. And so I was a freshman in college and said, I can go do that. Yes, I'd be happy to. Went on down to St. Mary's, and there in the chapel, Monsignor McGuire was there, and I think he recognized me. He says, hello, my son, and how are you? And I said, fine, Father. He stood there for a little bit, and this was at a time in which he was in his 80s. And he looks over and he says, how's your Latin? Do you remember any of it? And I said, not a lot of it, Father. We went on out, and he went out in front of the thing, and it's a chapel. There's probably 20 or 25 people there in the chapel. And I remember he walked on out, and he sat. And he just kind of looked at me, and he says, in the name of the Father and of the Son, in nomine Patri, Spili, and he went into it. Everything comes back. I never forgot it. But that was more than 10 years later. See, some things don't leave you in our faith. And part of it is the message that all of us should never forget. And Palm Sunday is a huge part of it. Because Palm Sunday comes before Easter. And yet at this time in which we have a celebration of Jesus coming in to the holy city of Jerusalem, we see in Palm Sunday ourselves. Because on that day we also talk about what we did to Jesus. And that makes us all uncomfortable because we're a part of it. How would we have reacted if we were there? Would we have been there and laying out the palms and celebrating and saying that we have our Messiah? And would we have just as quickly followed the mob and said this is wrong, and we just as well point to somebody and walk away from him? Would we deny him? How would we feel? And so for me, Palm Sunday is the Sunday in which I'm uncomfortable. And it's not just because of the length of the gospel service or because of the gospel. It's because I put myself in that position and I wonder how I would have responded. And I think a lot of us feel kind of the same way. I think about that and then think about this big Catholic family we have, and I think about my own family. And growing up, I'm the oldest of 11. My youngest brother, Jamie, is 16 years younger than me. Jamie actually looked very seriously at joining the priesthood. In fact, he spent 2.5 years in Rome at the American College. And I'll never forget the phone call I got. It was 2001. Got a call in about 11:30 in the morning, my time. I was getting ready. I just announced that I was going to work to try to become the next governor of South Dakota. And name ID was about 5% across the country. I just told my partner that I was going to do it, and I had to at least try. I knew I wasn't going to make it, but I had to try for some reason. And I got a call from Jamie, who was at the American College in Rome. Now, this is 11:30 in the morning, my time, which was about 6:30 at night, his time. And it was the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Jean had just picked up the kids, and they were headed for Lake Preston to see her family. And I answer the phone, and Jamie's on it. He's talking about all the things going on in Rome and about what's popping there and about his own journey, making decisions about what he wanted to do. And he was at that point in which he had a couple of weeks to decide whether or not he wanted to continue to pursue the priesthood or if he wanted to come back to South Dakota and have a family. And in the middle of this, it took almost a half an hour of visiting back and forth. And he finally just said, he says, if you're going to run for governor, would you have a spot for maybe me to help you if I were to do that? And I said, Jamie, if you come home, we've got a spot where you can stay. And yeah, I'd love to have your help, because I'm not going to pay you, but I'd sure take your help. There's no money in this, remind you. And about that time, I hear in the background this beautiful music. And Jamie's just chattering. I mean, he's just so excited and he's talking. And I finally stop him because there's bells going on in the background. And they're beautiful. I say, Jamie, what's that? What's that in the background? What is that? And he stops. And he says, oh no. I said, well, what is that? And he says, that's the bells of St. Peter. It's the end and the beginning of the new church year, and I've got to be in church here in like 5 minutes. I got to go, goodbye. What Jamie had heard, and he could hear it, was the music, but he heard it all the time. It was a part of his daily life. What I heard over the phone on that day was something beautiful and special that I didn't get to hear normally. So for me, I noticed it. For Jamie, it was background. I thought about that because at that point here in South Dakota, so many of us, we take for granted what we have here. We take for granted all of the good. We take for granted and we complain about our government, but how many other places in the world are people free? We take for granted the fact that, we've got inflation, but we don't lack for food. We are protected. We have a law enforcement. We have fire protection. We have police protection. We have the opportunity to go to coffee and to tell everybody what we would do different. Nobody comes looking for us. And we take it for granted. That, I think, is wrong. And while it is good to feel secure, we should remember that there are other people in our society that don't have that same comfort level. You see, these are the people that need the rest of us to pay attention to them. They're here. We sometimes pass them on the street. We sometimes notice that they're around the corner, but they're just part of what we pass up. See, this is what Catholic Social Services is designed to help us with. It is our opportunity to be involved and not to forget or to put into the background that special needs that others have, that we take for granted. You're all here not for the meal. You're here to gather from one another that agreement that there is something good that we believe in and that this is an opportunity for us to be involved with and to support. It's our opportunity to actually help other people. I want to thank you for being here because you truly make a difference by showing up. You know, George Mickelson, who was governor in this state, used to say that things get done by people who show up. Not waiting for somebody else to make the decisions, not expecting somebody else to fix things, not expecting somebody else to raise the dollars or to help actually administer them. Good things get done by people who give of themselves, and that one most important item above everything else your time, and your efforts. If you didn't take the time out on this very special day to come here, then somebody else would have to. But they probably wouldn't do as good of a job as you are capable of doing yourselves. And so my message for all of you here is that Palm Sunday should be a day in which, yes, we should feel a little uncomfortable. And yes, we should have in our memories all of those other Palm Sundays of our youth and perhaps some of the funny little stories that go with families that grow up. And Bishop, I'm sorry for my version of Catholic humor in some of these areas. I asked him earlier for absolution, and he said, I'll wait until after the speech is done to determine. I think that means he was determining on whether it's Our Fathers or Hail Marys and how many. But what we should never forget is that there is a true purpose for Palm Sunday. Because I think this is where, as my late wife Jean would suggest, if you have faith, then you have hope. Because Palm Sunday is about both. It is about our faith. And you think about this just a little bit. Where else are we expected to believe that there was a virgin birth, followed by the death and coming back to life of a man? And then the fact that 2,000 plus years later, we still understand and have in our faith that you can take bread and wine and turn them into the body and blood of Christ. You see, this isn't something that you simply prove. This is something that you believe in. This is our faith. And if you do not have faith, you don't have hope. And following Palm Sunday, everything comes together. Because you see, during this week, you have to think back about what makes us all so uncomfortable. Because here was our God's Son, who on the cross, as we find in Luke 23, 32, 34, I'll just quote it. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. He was speaking about us. And yet, just a few days later, this all comes to fruition on Easter. Coming from the lowest of lows, we now celebrate our faith. Because as so many of you will use, as we talk about when we talk about John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. He doesn't expect us to be angels. He gave his only Son so that we could be saved. What a loving God. What our faith asks of us is to accept the grace that the good Lord provides to us, and that we use it, and that by accepting that grace, the good works come out. There are fewer other things in this world that are of good works than of recognizing the needs of others and providing for those needs. That's what Catholic social services is all about. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day, for giving of your treasure, and of celebrating your Catholic faith. Thank you.